Welcome to the Smart College Buyer Podcast. My mission is to help high school families pay for college without taking on a truckload of debt. Each episode, I'll share insights into college admissions, financial aid, payment strategies, and more, often with expert guests. I'm Jack Wang, your host. I started helping families after struggling to navigate the process myself for my sons. If I needed help, I knew others did too. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Smart College Buyer Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jack Wang. And for this episode, I'm doing something different, sharing with you a podcast episode where I was recently the guest. I was on the Wicked Pissah Podcast produced by the Financial Planning Association of New England, or FPA of New England. Now, Wicked Pissah is one of those Boston sayings, so if you're from Boston, you're New England, you probably understand. If you're from outside of Boston or New England, it's just a Boston saying, okay? But it was really awesome to be on. And during that podcast, I talked all about the financial aid system and how it works, common misconceptions that parents and students often have about paying for college, creative ways that families can save and pay for college. And I share with them the one saying that drives me absolutely bananas because it's really not workable today. And I think it often contributes to some of those misconceptions that families continue to have about how aid works and how paying for college works. So with that, please enjoy this episode of the Wicked Pissah Podcast produced by the Financial Planning Association.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wicked Pissah Podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Keneally, founder of Catapult Financial Planning and current board member and director of programming for the FPA of New England. Co-hosting with me today is Michael Connaughton, co-founder of Lead Advisor and director of partnerships for the FPA of New England. Today, we're joined by Jack Wang, a nationally recognized college funding expert who helps families answer two critical questions: how to lower the cost of college and how to pay for it without derailing their financial future. Jack works with parents across the country, especially those who think they're too rich for aid, to uncover overlooked strategies for maximizing financial and merit aid, managing student loans, and building smart college lists before the first application is ever submitted. He's been featured in outlets like Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Yahoo Finance, and regularly speaks to financial professionals through organizations like the FBA, Boston Bar Association, and the Massachusetts Society of Enrolled Agents. He's also the host of the Smart College Buyer Podcast, where he dives deep into the financial side of higher education. Jack, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me on, Kathleen and Michael. I really appreciated being here.
Yeah, we for those who are listening that may not be in our area, Jack joined us at our most recent Wicked Good Talks event where we had a 529 college planning day. And if you haven't heard Jack speak in person, reach out to him, get him to your local FPA chapter event because he is an encyclopedia of knowledge for all things college planning and very entertaining too, I must say. You got some great feedback from your presentation.
Thank you. The best part of that event, I think, was I had convinced Kristen, right, to do walk-up music for me, right, as I got introduced. That was the best part. Oh.
Yes, we do still talk about that. So we're as programming director for the chapter, we're in talks with all of our other speakers about what walk-up music we're gonna have for them. But you said you were gonna come in and play the walk-up music for us, right? You're gonna be our walk-up music person now. Is that right?
I think I'm gonna have to, right?
Yeah, I think so.
You're gonna have to keep that going.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Well, so thanks again for joining us. I'm excited to kind of chat with you today in a little bit more detail and one-on-one than the recent presentation you did for our members. But I think, we always like to start by asking our guests just to tell us, about yourself, like your professional journey. How did you wind up doing, what you're doing and helping families plan for college?
Yeah, kind of an unexpected entry into this. So, in my prior professional career, I was a commercial banker for many years, and I was actually a corporate trainer for many years. But at that time, I was actually going through a divorce, and my sons were in middle school at that time, and their mother had been divorced before. So she was a little bit more experienced in the overall process. I had not. And one of the things that she really wanted to push for was to have a more specific provision in the divorce agreement about paying for college, since it was getting kind of close for our two boys. And at that time, I had actually just started in financial services. I didn't really know anything other than throw every last dime you got into 529 and just pray, hope for the best. Um, so coincidentally, I was actually playing on a men's baseball team at that time, men's league, and one of my teammates was then the financial aid officer for a major internationally known university here in the Boston area. I won't say who. And in between innings, I'm literally peppering him with questions on how does this work and how's that. And he was very generous and shared the information. We're actually still great friends today. He's moved on from that school to actually he does consulting for colleges and universities now around the country. But we talk all the time, and he was sharing all this stuff with me, and I realized, wow, like this is complicated, and of course I'm getting it in like chunks, right? Like I'm asking him questions in between innings, and then it's like, oh yeah, I gotta go play the field, or oh yeah, I gotta grab a bat and get in the on deck circle because I gotta hit soon. So it was pretty funny, but he was great about it, and I realized that if I needed to know, other families need to know as well. So that was really my entrance into this, and the more I dove into it, the more I realized, wow, like this can be really complicated, and it is very much a game. It's not really the game that parents think it is, but it is very much a game. But as a game, it's also a winnable game. And so I'm like, I need to help for myself, so why not see if I can help other people too? And it started slowly, and then but over time, like this is a topic that like if you have a kid, especially a high school age kid, this is what everybody wants to know, right? Like I've never had a parent of a high school student said, "Nah, we're good. I got money coming out of my ears. I don't need to know about this," right? Like that has never happened, or at least not the circles I run in, I suppose.
Fair enough. I mean, you call it a game. Like, is it a game that is winnable, or is it just everybody's destined to lose?
No, it's definitely winnable, but as the saying goes, right? What's the definition of insanity? Right? Doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result every time. And so, parents and students, but mostly parents, think of this as the process of when they went to college. That could have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or more. And it was very different then. And I went to college over 30 years ago, and it was very different. And so parents think, well, my kid just needs to get good grades and good test score. That's it. They're going to get into a college, get into an Ivy League or whatever, and get a lot of scholarships. And that's not how it works. I mean, yeah, it helps, right? Good grades, good test scores certainly help, but that's not really how it works. And so, but parents still do the same thing as what they did 30 years ago, which is I'm going to, have my kid apply to a bunch of schools, right? Find the quote unquote right school or the good school, however they define that, get in, and then think about the money part, you know, how aid works and try to get a lot of aid. And you can actually see that in the information that high schools share with students today. A lot of high schools their guidance counselors will give students this college planning timeline. Like, here's what you need to do freshman year, here's what you need to do sophomore year, junior year, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a great resource, right? Like, it's good information. But the very first mention of anything financially related is fall senior year when hey, you got to fill out the FAFSA soon, right? Whereas parents really need to think about that a lot earlier in the process because it has an impact on aid. But this timeline has been around since like I was in high school, right? Like this really hasn't changed. So again, definition of insanity, but parents can win this game if they're open-minded to thinking differently about this.
Jack, to that point, the saying, you can't win the game if you don't know the rules, right? So tell us what parents and students should be thinking about and some of the things that are often missed that you're identifying and seeing all the time.
Yeah, there's so many aspects to this. You know, just strictly on the financial side, parents often think that the numbers are the numbers, right? Like people will say, "Oh, I'm too rich for aid," or conversely, if they're a little bit lower income or lower assets, they might, run a calculator online and say, "Hey, I'm eligible for X dollars in aid." But then when it comes time to actually apply and do everything, they find that maybe they didn't get the dollars that they thought. And so the thing that parents really fail to realize, right, to sort of understand this whole thing, is that number one, on the dollar side, just because you are eligible does not mean you will get it, right? Which is really unlike anything else in our country, right? Like if you're eligible for Medicare, you sign up and you get it. If you're eligible for Social Security, you sign up and you get it, right? But when it comes to aid and merit dollars, just because you're eligible does not automatically guarantee that you're going to get it. So oftentimes I have families say, "Hey, I was supposed to be, I was supposed to get $10,000 in aid and they gave me six. What happens?" Like, again, just because you're eligible doesn't mean you get it. That's number one. Number two is, parents obviously love their kids and and we all think highly of our own kids. But what they really fail to realize is colleges really don't view it that way, right? Like so much time is spent on like test prep and grades and writing the perfect essay. And again, those are important. I'm not trying to minimize those. But at the end of the day, colleges look at students compared to other students, right? So so I often tell families, like, if you think about if your kid is the valedictorian of their high school, but they apply to a Stanford, a Harvard, or something where all the other valedictorians of the high schools apply, then being valedictorian at a place like that means you're average, right? And that's really kind of hard for parents sometimes and students to hear, but it's true. There's 30,000 high schools in the United States. So if you're valedictorian, that means there's 29,999 other valedictorians, right? Awesome, awesome achievement, but in certain contexts it doesn't actually mean that much. And so parents start to think, well, my kid does this, my kid does that, and they should deserve a ton of aid or a ton of scholarships. Like, yeah, but you have to look at the context. And so that causes a lot of families a lot of angst because they think they're going to get X dollars in aid to lower the cost of college, and then it doesn't happen.
How much time do you spend in working with your clients on the planning process, sort of not just running the numbers, but resetting expectations with families about kind of what you just talked? Like, is it an even split? Is it really more financial and maybe a little bit of the emotional aspect to it, or is it more emotional and less dollars and cents focused?
I think for anybody listening, right, who really does planning for their clients, I think you find that, it's like 95% emotional value philosophies and like 5% of actual number crunching. Um, again, I often joke that if I were to go back to school, it's not for an MBA, it's not for what I would go back to like pharmacy school or like go get a master's in psychology, right? Pharmacy school so I can prescribe drugs. That would just be so much simpler. Um, no, and especially in college, right? There's so much ego involved. So if you think about normal, like say retirement planning, um, and I'm speaking very generally now because yeah, technically, can I do it? Yes, of course. Do I do it? No. But in terms of retirement planning, you could people can do all sorts of things, and there's not necessarily an ego thing involved, like retiring early, retiring late, or retiring to playing golf every day, right? Like no, like that's not a flex, right? But college is, and so parents, and students, have all these thoughts in their head. They could be myths, misconceptions, whatever, about what makes for a good school. There's a lot of ego and sort of pride involved. Like, hey, I really want my kid to go to an Ivy League. To kind of show off, right? Like, not only is a good achievement, but also to kind of show off to the rest of the family or friends or whatever. or there are legacy situations where maybe the parents went to particular schools, so they want their kid to go, and things like that. And so talking people off that ledge is a huge part of what I do, because they have in their mind that, and many families I talk to, hey, if my kid does not go to an Ivy League school, their life is over, right? But we know that that's not true, right? Like, yeah, it's awesome if you go, but it's not like the only thing and there is. And so I'll just share a quick story. I mean, I talked with a family recently where the dad went to Harvard. The mom has a cultural background where that's the expectation, right? Going to Ivy League. Kid got into Harvard, but they lived a huge lifestyle. They're paying for private school for their older one and then also for their younger one coming up. And the dad, who was the sole breadwinner, had lost his job a couple years ago. So, and he's like senior level executive type level. So he had a big income. And they had a lot of savings, but they've basically burned through the savings, paying for their lifestyle, paying for private school and whatever. And the dad admitted to me that if they kept on this pace, they were going to be out of money within a year. Now, as a financial professional, you would think, or one would think, okay, if that's going to happen, you would make a different choice. But the 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 hold, or the emotional need of like, my kid got into Harvard and therefore must go, was so strong that doing something different was not an obvious choice, right? Which just blows my mind. But that's the type of thing I run into a lot. I mean, not people running out of money, but they like, this like perception of you must go to this school, or it's anything else is waste or something, right? That, so it's like 95-5, 95% emotions, values, philosophies, 5% actual number crunching.
Jack, as you're telling stories like that, it brings me back to a podcast I listened to a while back, Gangster Capitalism, talking about the celebrity scandals to get people into college and how that was driven by ego. It was unbelievable, right? Some of the people that were involved in that, and the lengths and forgery and everything else that went through it
Yeah.
Who
to
knew
get them.
Aunt Becky would
Exactly, right? Like
go
I
to such
know, right?
lengths?
Like,
it's to your point though, the emotion, the ego that's involved specifically from the parents in a lot of cases, right, is a driving force. So in that scenario that you just mentioned, where maybe the father is hell bent on sending his daughter to Harvard because of the importance and the legacy, I mean, are you talking to that person about his daughter taking on aid or looking into alternatives? Like, how do you even navigate a situation like that?
right. So one of the other things, I'll say, to answer your question, one of the other misconceptions that exists out there is that um, students can get a lot of loans, or they just, hey, throw out a couple of scholarship applications and then get all this free money, and then there you go. Um, which is, again, also very different. So decades ago, students used to be able to borrow much more for their college. Of course, college is a lot cheaper. So you could string together a couple scholarships, a couple loans, and maybe a part-time job, and you could pay for college. That does not exist today in any shape or form. Um, but parents think that, because I hear parents say like, okay, as a parent, I'm willing to chip in like $10,000 a year, but if my kid wants to go somewhere that costs more than that, they're going to have to handle the rest, borrow the rest, right? And some of the colleges, like a Harvard, or not even Ivy League, but some of these privates, the stickers are like 95,000. There's no place on the planet where your 18-year-old child with no real credit history, no full-time work history, is going to come up with like 85 grand, right? Like, that will never happen. So they can't borrow. That's number one. Number two is that, you know, parents think, oh, just apply for a couple scholarships and that'll be it. And the reality is, yes, there are a lot of what we call external scholarships out there. But you really have to do a lot of work, right? You have to apply to a lot of scholarships to end up with 10,000, 20,000, 80,000, whatever the number is. But when talking with families, right, like, I also have to educate them around the realities of how these things work. And so, um, and oftentimes that's a big wake up call for families as well, because the parents thought, well, I'm just going to chip in 10 and my kid's going to take care of the rest. And then they realize, oops, that's actually not possible. So, I talk to families around the different possibilities and what they can do. Now, in that case of that family going to Harvard, or the daughter got into Harvard, they had not only drained their savings, drained their 401k, but also they have racked up a ton of credit card debt that they were no longer able to pay back. So they had also entered into a one of those debt settlement programs. But as a result of that, they had to let their credit cards go late, right? Basically default and negotiate. But that by doing that, that closes the door to federal loans, because even though federal loans, there's really no credit criteria, but one of the few credit criteria, you can't have to be defaulting on any other debt right now. And so that family literally had no option. Like, we walked through it all, and like, but as a result of the sort of non-college related thing in their financial life, that now has closed the door for the college financing. I mean, you get down to basically like you're gonna have to sell a kidney or something. That's
My gosh.
um which which as a financial professional, I don't think we should ever give that advice, right? Like, by the way, to make your financial goals work, you should probably pop out a kidney. Probably not the best advice out there.
I don't think the SEC would look too kindly on that if that was our advice to
Yeah.
clients. Just don't put it in writing.
Yeah, don't. By the way, for the purposes of this podcast, that was not advice. This is for educational purposes only, and entertainment purposes only. I'm not telling anybody to sell a kidney.
Jack
Please
is not
consult your
suggesting people harvest their organs for compensation.
please consult your own tax and financial advisor.
Sure.
So and I'm curious, like, how did this situation resolve itself, or has there been a resolution? Is it just the kid's not going to go to school, the kid's going to go to a state school? Like, what, is this still sort of in progress where they're trying to figure out what the next steps are?
Yeah, so it's in progress. They're actually not a client.
Okay.
I did have this conversation recently, and but I told the parents that they really have to go back and evaluate what's important to them. Um, and this family lives in California, and the University of California system is a phenomenal system. You have schools like Berkeley and UCLA and Davis and Irvine, and they're great schools in their own right. I mean, most kids would kill to get into Berkeley, never mind Harvard, right? It's just as hard to get into Berkeley as it is Harvard, pretty much. So, but as an in-state resident, that could bring the cost down from like 90 something thousand to about, I think, like 35, 36. So yeah, they still have bigger financial problems that they have to solve, which unfortunately there's nothing for me I can do. But at least it would help slow the bleeding, right? It doesn't stop the bleeding, but at least help slow it if the kid
Yeah.
went to Berkeley or UCLA instead. So,
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm very curious as to what they decide, because that the values and the emotional pull is so strong.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to know how it winds up as well. But sort of going back to many parents think that their kid is like the brightest one ever, from day one, and they are hoping or planning that their kid goes to an expensive school. If you're talking to a young family that is thinking about how to balance their own budget and save for retirement and save for college, if you're talking to a family that has lofty goals, educational goals for their children someday, is it a matter of like, yes, shove a bunch of money into a 529 plan because you may not get the aid that you think you're going to get later on? Or is it put your own oxygen mask on first and save as much for retirement and then hope college figures itself out?
Yeah, a lot. You touched on a number of points there, and so I want to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about how aid works. And so the the best proxy for how aid works is actually the NFL draft. So for listeners, if you're familiar with that, right, teams pick players but each team can view a player differently, and you draft for a position. Like if you need a quarterback, you take a quarterback. If you don't, you don't. But if you follow anything like that, you know that first round draft picks get a lot more money than a seventh round draft pick. So in the college context, I mentioned earlier how colleges are really evaluating students against each other. Um, that's literally how it works, right? But the position could be a certain major, like a college might say, well, we need more of this major, or they're pulling kids from a certain geographic area, or it could be boy versus girl, or a combination of all the above, or even other factors. So the more that students the more students help the college meet the college's goals, the more aid they're going to get, sort of period. And there are ways to figure it out. That's the game. That's the game, right? Is figuring that out. So for like a young family, the traditional thinking is to just sock away money. And should the parents sort of put on their own oxygen mask first? The answer to that is yes. But I would also say that um, what I see, because I deal with a lot of what we call late stage families, which are high school students, and they have saved. Um, Parents, I would say that parents really want to think about flexibility in their finances, right? Like 401ks are great ways to save for retirement. IRAs, sure, we know that, but 401ks and IRAs are terrible for college. Roth is a different story. But 529 is a great way to save for college, but terrible for retirement. Well, the reality is you can save in any number of ways. And so I'm a big proponent of saving in ways that maximize flexibility so that it's available for college, and maybe it's tax advantage money, but it's also there for retirement. Because I get a lot of people who come to me and say, listen, in fact, another family came to me recently. Uh, hey, our kid is aiming at just outside Ivy League schools, but we're older parents and we don't want to drain our savings or possibly have to dip into our retirement account to pay for college, because we're older parents and stuff. So, so I like the flexibility, because this particular family, if they didn't have a lot of outside savings and they didn't believe in debt. That's the other issue. They were gonna have to dip into like their 401k and take a tax hit to take money out for college, and that's no fun, right? Nobody wants to do that. Um, the one thing I will say that's true, but in practice it's really not, is the saying of, hey, you can borrow for college, but you can't borrow for retirement. And I've heard that from so many people, and I'll be honest, that phrase drives me bananas. Um, While that is technically true, as mentioned earlier, these days students cannot do the borrowing. Right? If there has to be any borrowing, it has to be on the parents. So, as an example, there's a family that I did work with, limited planning, but this family, their daughter got into a great school. They're not from Massachusetts, but the daughter got into a great school in our field here in the Boston area, but it was going to cost them like, I don't know, 70 grand a year. They were going to have to borrow like $65,000 a year for that kid to go. Their regular financial planner had told them, hey, if you want to retire early, you need to max out your 401k, right? Max out your retirement savings. Okay, good advice, right? Fair advice, right? Pretty standard stuff. But when they came to me, they had already picked a school, so they knew they were going to have to borrow. And I told this family, look, you're not going to retire as early as you think. They're like, no, why not? Right? Our financial planner ran the numbers and we're going to earn X% on our investments, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, you're borrowing $65,000 a year. That's going to have to get paid back. And oh, by the way, you have kid number 2 still on the way, right? And that also brings up issues of like equity. If you borrow 65,000 a year for kid number 1, do you have to do the same for kid number 2? There's issues around that. Like you if you do that together, right, you're talking half mil, and with interest $750,000 that you have to shell out over time, borrow and shell out over time. You're not retiring early. Like, I don't care what the numbers say. right? And so the reason I hate that saying is because, they had heard that saying. They're like, well, we'll borrow. But the reality is any borrowing that has to happen has to be done by the parents. And so if you borrow because you have to, it's going to impact your retirement. Just like for this family, it's going to impact their retirement. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Jack, how do parents broach this subject with their kids where their kids are steadfast around going to a certain university? The parents probably want it too, but there's also these financial conditions and situations that they have to take into account. How do you suggest these conversations take place, and do you help clients broaching some of these topics?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, because as parents, like we don't, especially for something like education, right? And it's important, right? So we don't necessarily want to say no, right? It might be easier to say no, like no, I will not buy you a new car. Fine, right? But for education, it's really a lot different. Um, what I say is that you have to end up having this conversation, as difficult as it is, be, otherwise someone ends up crying, right? Either the parents realize that they don't have the money, so the kid works hard, gets into an Ivy League, and then parents finally realize you can't do it. The kid ends up crying, or the parents can't say no, don't want to say no. They send the kid to that school, pay a huge amount of money. The parents end up crying because their finances are circling the drain, right? Um, I would say this: the two parents have to get on the same page first, and I will tell you. And so pre-COVID, before Zoom, I used to, for local clients, I used to go to their house and sit near the kitchen table and have these kind of conversations. And one question I would ask parents is, "Hey, when you say that you want to save and pay for college, what do you actually mean?" And I would push them like give me a number per year or give me like a percentage of the cost per year, right? Like 50% of the cost or whatever. And of like private or public, right? Because 50% of public is a lot different than 50% of private. And the way I used to do it was I would give each parent like a post-it note, right? And like write down your answer and don't let the other person see it. Okay, so they kind of turn their back and right, and they kind of scribble like no peeking, right? In all the years I've done this, which is over 15 years, I can count the number of times on one hand where the parents have agreed,
Wow.
right?
I don't doubt that.
And so, I've had people close, but you end up with something like, one parent will say like, well, I went to private school. My parents have planned really well. So I was able, they were able to pay for college the whole way and I didn't have to take on debt. So I don't want to put that burden on my kid, right? Understandable, right? I don't disagree with that. And then you have the other parents say something like, well, I went to public school, but my parents wanted me to have a skin in the game. So, they paid for half and I had to work and earn money for the other half. So I want my kid to learn the value of having to work for it. So I want my kid to have a stake in the game. So I'm willing to pay 50% of public, right? So here in Massachusetts, 50% of public is like $17,000 versus 100% of private, which runs up into the $90,000 range. So as a planner, if you're trying to plan, right, you put in the software and you work backwards. Well, what are you aiming at? Right. So before you really have the conversation with the kid, the parents really need to get on the same page. And of course, here is where all the egos and the values and philosophies come out like big time, right? But yeah, again, I can count on the number of times on one hand where parents have actually agreed. Parents need to get on the same page first and then go talk to the kid.
It's like, I mean, I'm just picturing like, what is it, the dating game where like you you have to you ask both people the question and they write down their answers and you see if you get a
Yeah,
match. I
yeah,
mean,
right, exactly.
they should
Exactly.
build that into all the dating apps now, like
I
ahead
know,
of
right?
time.
I
Uh,
will tell you, you reminded me of a story. I went to a family's home one time, right? This was years ago, and having a conversation. The kids were there as twins, boy-girl twins. Um, the wife had one number in mind, the husband had a different number in mind, and I could tell based on the conversation that they wanted me to tell their kids that the parents couldn't afford it. I'm like, I'm not doing that, right?
Oh
Like
my
that is
God.
not my job. You're not paying me enough for that. Yeah.
Could they pay you enough? Is there a number? Like everyone's got
Yeah,
a number,
no,
right?
no, no.
But I mean like a lot of this to be candid, like I don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about this problem necessarily, but like all these conversations like happened when I was going to school. My parent, and I think I've talked about this on different episodes related to college planning. But my parents split up when I was like 7, 8 years old. I had two younger sisters, we're all very close in age, and I wanted to go to BU. Like I loved the city, wanted to go there, had a bunch of friends there, and my mom was like, "There's no way." So I ended up at UMass for 2 years, and the deal was I went to UMass Amherst for 2 years, and after 2 years, I could transfer wherever I wanted. So I ended up at Babson, which was a much better fit for me anyway than UMass was. And very glad that I ended up with the education that I got, the fact that I didn't graduate with owing a bunch of money. I was able to live at home because we lived in Wellesley at the time and I worked part-time. So, it sort of like was this cobbled together education, but and I definitely did not have the same sort of experience that your normal your typical student may have that goes to a 4-year program and stays in one school and doesn't transfer. I call myself a super senior because not all my credits transferred. So it took me 4.5 years to get out. But I think part of it is just sort of like being creative and realizing that there isn't just one path that everybody has to follow, that there are different ways you can go about it and still get a great education and wind up very successful later in life.
Right, exactly. And I think one of the challenges as financial professionals, right? Because we see the numbers and we can project out, but really kind of meeting clients in their headspace. And I know a lot of planners kind of run into this issue, right? Like clients won't take my advice. If your client's really in the headspace of, my kid must go to some really expensive school, if a planner then tells that family, no, you're actually better off for your kid to go to community college. Not that there's anything wrong with community college, right? But your clients are not going to take that advice, right? It's like, if they normally shop at some high-end luxury store and you're basically telling them that they instead should shop at the dollar store, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So kind of sorting through those values, emotions, and kind of what the vision is, once you get clarity around that first, right, then you can build the plans a lot easier. Otherwise you just end up arguing about this and the client doesn't take your advice and probably eventually changes planners if you keep pushing something like that.
Right, right, totally. And I always say, like, it's not my job to tell my clients what their goals should be. It's my job to help you figure out how to reach those goals. And I think the same thing can be said for college and education planning. Like sometimes, mathematically, it may not make sense to pay off your mortgage, but if your goal is to pay off your mortgage as soon as possible, like, okay, like the numbers don't always match what the client wants to do. And I think
Right.
that's fine. Like that is our job to help them figure out how to make those two things reconcile.
Right.
Jack, we all know the saying it's never too late, but my guess is in certain situations to plan and strategize for college, maybe it just is, right? So when is the ideal time? Obviously, the earlier the better, but to engage with somebody like you and really start thinking about scenarios and planning and strategies, when is that right time for families?
So I deal with uh late stage plan, which is when kids hit high school age. So I'll give you two answers on that. Um, the ideal for me, so if there are financial strategies, tax related strategies that families want to use that I would talk to them about, the ideal is as early as freshman year of high school. And the reason for that is because the first year of income that is looked at by colleges for financial aid is the year that spans the spring of sophomore year through the fall of junior year. That's known as the base year. So if you need to move stuff around, reposition assets, go bury money in the backyard, whatever the case may be, you need to get that stuff done before that window opens, right? So spring of sophomore year. So that's why I say as early as freshman year. The reality, based on what I talked about earlier with the timeline stuff, the reality is most students come to me or families come to me junior year or the beginning of senior year. And yeah, there are things that you can do, but the time frame is compressed. I will also tell you that, probably the too late is I've had families contact me like a week before the enrollment deposits due. Like I've used to get these phone calls and emails. Hey, enrollment deposits due next week. My kid got into XYZ school, but we didn't get any aid. So it's $90,000 a year. We don't have the money, but the deposits due next week. What do we do? Powerball tickets. I mean,
That's what I was gonna say. Play the lottery.
or that's when
Trip,
you sell the
trip
kidney,
to
I guess, or
Vegas.
something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, something, right? I mean, so that is a
Uh,
little bit too late, but again, if they're open to alternative strategies and thinking about this process differently, again, we talked about sort of the definition of sanity, then there are a lot of things that families can do. But if you just sort of follow and do what you did 30 years ago and again, you can't expect a different result every time if you're just going to do the same thing over and over.
Is there anything that advisors like listening to this episode right now should be talking to their clients about that they might not be talking to clients about like sooner in the process? You mentioned some strategies if people do come to you like freshman year. Can you give us an example of what that might be that maybe like isn't as well known in the financial planner community of, rather than just put more money in the 529 plan?
Yeah, so I think the two sides of that is really one is sort of strategies to lower the cost of college, and then the other sort of thing that as planners we have to do is think about how to pay for it. So just on lowering on the side of cost of college, I would encourage planners to kind of share that NFL analogy, right? Like as families start thinking about college, okay, yeah, you want to go to Stanford, but is your kid really a first round draft pick at Stanford? Or they a seventh round draft pick, right? And really take a objective look at things like that. Help families understand that. That would be really good. On the paying side, I think one area that often gets ignored is tax related strategies. And so if obviously if you have money in a 529, use the money in 529. There you go. But if you have clients with a lot of non-qualified assets or like employer stock or something that they're going to have to use, a lot of advisors or financial folks that run into say, well, the family's going to have to sell. But for those advisors who are much more tax aware, there are tax strategies like you can gift those assets to the kid. Granted, you have to watch out for the kiddie tax, but then you could intentionally borrow and do your tax filing in a way where the kid can now take advantage of their low income tax rate, fill up the kiddie tax bucket, even take advantage of the non-refundable portion of American Opportunity Tax Credit, and you can actually shelter a lot of gains, at a zero tax rate, especially if the parents are at a high capital gains tax rate and they're also subject to the net investment tax surcharge of 3.8%. Um, and also one of the best ways I find to save and pay for college. Number one way I tell people, own your own business, be self-employed, right? Right. Because you can utilize a ton of tax-related strategies to help save and pay for college. Again, consult your CPA. There's a lot of I's to dot, T's to cross, but the concept in general, I find sometimes people and advisors don't think about is this sort of tax angle because you were going to pay the taxes anyway on that income or the capital gains. So I often tell people, would you rather pay X percent income or would you rather pay zero? My vote's for zero.
Zero sounds good. So, like on the business and self-employment side, is it more about like maximizing your deductions to lower your income than you're like reporting lower income on your FAFSA? Is that a part of it, or are there other strategies that you look at as well?
So if you're a self-employed person or business owner, one of the strategies that you can do is you can hire your own kid as employee of the business. Now, it has to be reasonable wage for reasonable work, and there's a lot of paperwork involved. But if you think about it, the standard deduction for a single person in the year that we're recording this, I think is about 15.5, 15.5, 15.6, something like that. So you could actually pay your kid legitimately, right? 15,500, let's say. That's now earned income for their kid. But on the kid's tax return, you have earned income of 15.5, standard deduction of 15.5, tax-free income. You get the deduction on the business side, so multiply that by whatever tax bracket you're in. So that's your federal income tax savings. But now on the kid side, you actually have earned income. So that kid can actually open a Roth IRA. Roth IRA is actually one of my favorite vehicles to save for college because you can access the principal at any time for any reason. So 7,000 can go into that. You can do something with the other money, whatever. Right. And now you have this. And actually if you do the tax filing the right way, and once the kid gets into college, you can continue this. You can actually have the kid take advantage of the non-refundable portion of AOTC. So if you do the math, you can actually pay your kid about 25 to 30,000 and actually make it tax free. The hard part is usually finding what they can do. So a couple of quick rules. The federal government says no agricultural work, no operating heavy machinery, or the best one is no playing with explosives. You cannot handle explosives.
That's too bad. I mean, especially
I
leading
know,
up
right?
to the 4th of July, coming up.
I know. Right? And at the state level, there's state laws like your kid cannot work as a prostitute or gigolo, cannot be a pimp or a madam, cannot have like an illegal drug or gun running operation. All the fun stuff, right?
What's left?
I mean,
really?
well, I mean, what's left? I mean, honestly, right?
That a kid is
But I
going to
mean,
want to do. Yeah.
but it's a strategy now. Again, there's paperwork involved, and you have to meet all the applicable laws. But it's actually a great way because if you think about something like that, let's say you start a kid freshman year of high school and you max that out, right? Let's say 15.5 a year times 4 years. Well, that's over $60,000 of tax-free money, plus whatever income tax savings you had because you can take it as a deduction, right? So you're talking probably 70 grand, 75 grand or something, right? Of tax-free money for college that now you can use to pay for college or anything else. And again, it's on income that you were gonna have to pay taxes on anyway. So we're not really doing anything, like I'm not telling you to go out and get another client, right? It's money you were going to earn anyway. So why not?
Yeah.
So, Jack,
Interesting.
with all of that too, there's probably a lot of coordination that's involved, I would imagine, right? You're working to help strategize. They might have a financial planner. There's a tax advisor or CPA. Are you helping coordinate efforts there and with the communication from all parties to make sure that's done the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. Because financial aid regs actually differ from tax code. So for example, in the tax code, we talked about standard deduction being about 15.5. But if a family is going to qualify for need-based aid, the earnings limit for the student is about 11.5, right? So in prior years and early on, you can pay your kid 15.5. But now, if you think you're going to qualify for aid, and that's something that I figure out with families, during those college years and leading up to the college years, you drop the earnings, you drop your pay to your kid down to 11.5, so you don't mess up your own chances for aid, right? So there's some coordination there. So there's actually a number of important differences between financial aid regs and the tax code. And so I often tell CPAs, a lot of these different ways you help your clients save on taxes actually hurt them for financial aid and vice versa. So when you get to the college level, there's a lot of coordination between tax code, financial aid regs, and then also just like how financial products work, like how 529s work and how Roths work and stuff, right? You have to sort of find the happy medium between all of those things to do it right.
Yep. Makes sense. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to think about. Certainly a lot of moving pieces to keep track of as families get close to that age. So it's probably a good segue into asking you, where can our listeners find you if they are interested in reaching out and connecting with you, or if they have clients they want to send your way for some additional college planning help?
Yeah, actually, a couple of things. I do host my own podcast. It's called Smart College Buyer, available on all the major platforms. And even if the planner or the planner's clients send people to the podcast, because in the first handful of episodes, I answer probably 90 to 95% of the most common questions anyway, right? So I encourage people to listen, to subscribe, as they do with this podcast. But also people can reach out to me on social media, especially LinkedIn is my primary platform. So Jack Wang, Smart College Buyer. I post a lot of videos and other comments there. Or people happy to have them email me, Jack at longhornfin.com, short for Longhorn Financial. Always happy to chat. And I collaborate with a lot of other planners on clients because, I have this particular expertise. And even when I collaborate with other planners, I coordinate with them. So whatever we do for a college plan, it doesn't mess up or minimize the impact of what you might have set up for their retirement plan or other things. But there needs to be some coordination there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Jack. It's been a pleasure. Before we wrap up, I do want to just put in a plug for our chapter's next upcoming Wicked Good Talks event. We will be at the Artisan Hotel in Salem, New Hampshire on Thursday, August 14th for a full day focused on how advisors are using artificial intelligence in their practice. You can register and find more information at www.fpanewengland.org. So we hope to see some of our listeners there that day. And again, Jack, thanks so much for joining us today, and sharing all of your stories and expert advice. It's been a really interesting conversation.
No, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing what kind of walk-up music your speakers choose for that next event.
Yes, we'll have to work on that. All right.
Thank you, Jack.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Smart College Buyer podcast. I hope you found the information useful for your family. Follow me on LinkedIn for more episodes, videos, and tips. The link is in the show notes. Remember, you can spend time now to plan and strategize, or you can spend more money later. Success in college admissions and financial aid isn't about luck. It's about being intentional. I'm here to help you every step of the way.